So let's look at the liturgical year again, because it keeps reinforcing itself. It begins with Advent, the preparation of a birth, the preparation that involves being pregnant with divinity. Pregnant with divinity. It is a season that affirms this divine vision for oneness with all of creation. It carries on Advent, Christmas, etc. We're going to come right now to Pentecost. And we will hear shades of that same vision of a God who's trying to get us into one spirit and trying to get us beyond the language of other and into the language of union, communion, oneness. And let me tell you that for those of us who have been shaped by that tradition, it requires a quantum leap. Even those who haven't been in a sanctuary for 50 years still insist in their language, the big guy, the other guy, the guy upstairs. Just drives me nuts. Because within our biblical text, we have another story, and that story is inviting us again through this Pentecostal narrative to imagine all of us living in spirit, in God, in divinity. So here's the passage. The early followers of Jesus, not quite knowing what to do, lost and afraid, without direction, are all gathered in Jerusalem, along with Jewish pilgrims from around the world who have come to celebrate the Jewish festival of the Feast of Harvest, or the Feast of Weeks. And let me share with you again that when we hear these stories, they are mythical. These are mythical stories that are meant to carry a huge truth, and if we read them literally, we're going to completely miss the point. So listen for the bigger story that this narrative is carrying, the larger cosmology that it is carrying. When the Feast of Pentecost came, they, the believers, were all together in one place. Without warning, there came a sound of a strong wind, gale force. No one could tell where it was coming from. It filled the entire building. And then, like wildfire, the Holy Spirit spread through their ranks, and they started speaking in a number of different languages as the Spirit prompted them. There were many Jews staying in Jerusalem just then, devout pilgrims from all over the world. When they heard the sound, they came on the run. Then, when they heard one after another their own mother tongues being spoken, they were thunderstruck. They couldn't for the life of them figure out what was going on and kept saying, "Aren't these all Galileans? How come we're hearing them talk in our various mother tongues, Parthians, Medes, and Elamites, visitors from Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, even Cretans and Arabs. They're speaking our languages." Their heads were spinning. They couldn't make head or tail of any of it. They talked back and forth, confused. What is going on here? Are they drunk on cheap wine? And that's when Peter stood up and, backed up by the other 11, spoke out with bold urgency. "Fellow Jews, all of you, who are visiting Jerusalem, listen carefully and get the story straight. These people are not drunk. They haven't had time to drink. It's only 9 o'clock in the morning. This is what the prophet Joel announced would happen. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on every kind of people. Your sons will prophesy, also your daughters. Your young men will see dreams, and your old men will see visions. I'm going to suggest that this is among the narratives within the Judeo-Christian tradition that invites us to reimagine the universe. And we're going to go back into the biblical testimony to see where we have heard this before and ignored it. Begin with Genesis 2 and 3. In the garden, God puts God's breath, or ruach, the Hebrew word for spirit, which is feminine, by the way, into Adam, which is the Hebrew word for ground or earth. So there's this implication that all matter is made of God's breath or made of God. Fast forward. The myth of the Virgin Mary affirms again this vision of the union of the divine and human. Mary is just an archetype. We are all called to be bearers, birthers of God. Fast forward, Jesus, who does not discriminate according to the holiness laws within his own tradition, but eats and drinks with everyone, and suggests that if you want to encounter God, well, that will happen wherever 2 or more are gathered. Big clue there. In the relationships and alchemy among us. And fast forward again, God pours spirit or breath into everyone. And it's for the purpose of creating a community that affirms and maintains everyone's differences. Hear that with the languages, right? The words that you spoke were central to your identity, so everyone got to keep their own unique identity. Language, vocare, vocation, personhood. And yet everybody gets one another. Can you see this thread woven throughout the biblical account? Subtle, insistent. And who picks it up? Meister Eckhart, a 13th century Dominican monk, insists that the mystery wants to share itself with us. Or Hafiz, an Islamic mystic, my beloved said, my name is not complete without yours. And I thought, how could a human's worth ever be such? And God, knowing what I was thinking, saying, I am made whole by your life. Each soul completes me. Or if you want another Christian, there's Teresa of Avila, the 16th century mystic. I said to God, I will always be unless you cease to be. And my beloved replied, I would cease to be if you died. So as we know, the powers that be did not take kindly to these mystical voices who reinforced an idea of divinity that could only be experienced in union or oneness. In their experience, the experience of the mystics, which was backed up by the mythology, God did not want to be other. You see what we did, right? We made God other, which means we can make anybody other. God wanted to be beloved at the very least, and a cosmic union, oneness at best. But, and no one says it quite as well as Malcolm X, we constantly move towards creating God in our own image. And so the Christian church, powered by patriarchy, created a God and a whole system of theology in the image of patriarchy, and it is in our bones. As hard or as long as some of us have been wrestling to transform that. And it was a system that reinforced sexism and racism and adherence to strict gender identity. Throughout the years, it reinforced the pecking order that Jesus and his early disciples, many of whom were women, so boldly challenged. So I'm going to suggest that the slogan from my denomination's inclusive initiative, God's love is for everyone, does not go far enough. Because it does not reflect the cosmology of unity and oneness. It contains shades of that paternal God. The one who is like us when we are at our most tolerant. The move towards greater inclusivity from the purpose of the Christian tradition requires the following. We need to abandon the Sunday school God, and let's not kid ourselves, friends, it's still old and male. And we have got to imagine that the mystery breathed its divinity into the entire creation, including us, and especially them. Which means each of us is a piece of God. We are the vessels of the sacred, and we assault and deny the mystery when we assault and deny another. And in this reciprocity, it's a change, isn't it? We breathe life into God. With every person that we include at the table, we grow together in our ability to reflect Imago Dei, the divine image. And if that is true, here's number 2. Then we decide who God is. And I know that's going to make some of us squirm. Here's some words from Ojibwe elder Richard Wagamese. Me. How do I find Creator? Old woman. You become what you seek. Me. I don't understand. Old woman. You decide what Creator is. If you decide she is peace, love, humility, and non-judgment, you decide to work toward embodying those qualities in your walkabout world. That's what sacred practice is for. And so for those of you who are uncomfortable with being empowered, with defining who God is, let me read to you the conclusion of the inquiry this week. The Independent National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls found that Indigenous women and girls are 12 times more likely to be murdered or to go missing than members of any other demographic group in Canada, and 16 more times likely to be slain or to disappear than white women. Well, why is that? Well, it's because the Christian church, aligned with the government of Canada a couple of centuries back, decided that the indigenous peoples of this land were heathen and their spirituality and culture needed to be obliterated. The church has always made decisions about who God was. So this is nothing new. Good news, we get to decide anew. 3. If this is true, then our deepest calling is to expand the table. We have no problem recognizing that biodiversity is at the heart of healthy ecosystems. I think that the invitation underlying the Pentecost mythology or story is an invitation to affirm that God can only be known through a human kaleidoscope diverse enough to challenge our comfort zone. And goodness knows that there's nothing that challenges the comfort zone of regular, and I might add, older white folk like us than conversations around sexuality and gender, which we are now learning about thanks to those who have the courage to tell us. Krista Tippett, in her graduation address to Middlebury College last month, said, "Your generation has come along and is reimagining and redefining gender. Gender is at once the either or by which every human being across time has been defined since birth, and an ultimate proof that to look at any human category closely enough is to see infinite variation." As hard as we try to see where one begins and the other ends, we are shown how interwoven and uncontainable such distinction remain. The deepest truth held within this is the inescapability of interdependence. That sometimes joyful, sometimes maddening, always fact that we need each other. So I will not be concluding with the suggestion that God's love is for everyone. I will include instead with the challenge which we exercise best when we exercise it together, to use the muscle of love in owning and shaping our divinity. In the words of Krista Tippett, practice muscular, adventurous public love, which will always require boldness and humility, so that our communities reflect that yearning at the heart of both Creator and creation, to live as one.